Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the World Discord Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Brian Endless.
I am one of your hosts, Joel Ostrow. How you doing,
How are
Brian?
you today, Joel Ostrow?
I'm here.
Well, okay,
Fascism hasn't gotten me yet.
it's better than the alternative, as people used to say. Excellent. Speaking of fascism, this is part 4 of our series on fascism. Frankly, we don't know how long it's going to go. We might be doing this until 2027 or 2028. We'll see how society goes and how many things we have to talk about here. Today, though, we are going to talk about how fascism interacts with the institutions that we hold dear, democratic institutions and other things. We're going to look at the domestic side today. Maybe we'll look at the international side later. And really, it's kind of a question. Is fascism something that is taking over our institutions? Is fascism something that is destroying our institutions? And this one is more Joel's area of expertise than mine. He loves the fascism and all those fascist
Wait a minute.
Oh, sorry. He loves studying all those fascist institutions.
Yeah.
My apologies.
You love genocide.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I am going to turn it to you to kick us off.
Yeah. Thanks, Brian. So dictatorships, when they replace democracies, tend to destroy or undermine some of the institutions, but not necessarily all of them. For example, Putin in Russia left many of the pre-existing, institutions, weak as they were after the fall of communism, intact. But fascism throughout history, when fascist regimes come to power, part of that coming to power is attacking and destroying as much as possible of institutions, norms, domestic and international. They create an atmosphere of turbulence, chaos, uncertainty as a way of asserting rule. That's a core feature of fascist rule. So before we started airing, Brian and I talked about it. I think we're going to divide this up between domestic institutions this episode, and then either the next one or a future institution will look at international institutions.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's just too damn much if we try to do both.
It's too much. Yeah. And it's true. I part of my research on post-Soviet Russia was on the attempt to create democracy, and really it involved, in the wake of the destruction of communism, an attempt to redesign really all of the domestic institutions, to change them to supporting what some authors in a pithy but accurate phrase described as creating open politics in an open society. And by virtue of studying that effort of creation, of necessity, I looked at, well, what is required of those institutions for democracy to work? And so now we see a global attack on those here in the United States by what I call the MAGA regime, because it far transcends one individual. He's just
right.
The personality cult. So sort of thought about doing this a fun way, and I'll turn it over to Brian to throw out an institution or norm that we consider a core of our history of democracy here in the United States, and we'll discuss what's happening to it.
Excellent. So I'm going to start with just democracy, except we can't just start with democracy. No, that's silly, because nobody actually knows what democracy is. So let's break it down a little bit, and maybe we can do the pieces of democracy one at a time. When Joel and I are teaching about this stuff, most people assume democracy is elections, and that's just one small piece of it. Everybody in the world has elections and has since at least World War II, regardless of what kind of regime, dictatorship, authoritarian, fascist, democratic, whatever you are. But democracy includes a lot of other things. Many of them are in the U.S. Bill of Rights. So a lot of what we're talking about is freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of association, freedom of political parties, freedom to vote, things like that. Why don't we start with the big one, though, that everybody looks at, elections? How is fascism impacting elections here?
Well, and you're right, because elections have become a feature of every political regime around the world as a source of legitimacy, real or imagined, or artificial. Putin holds elections in Russia, but they're neither free nor fair nor competitive.
Hmm.
Uh, his his regime controls the opposition parties, so they're not real opposition parties. Um, but as I sort of said in the introduction, what fascist regimes do is attack the existing norms. So even across democracies, how elections get conducted and the norms around them vary. Um, the United States of America, of course, has featured a two-party system really since its inception. That's a result of first past the post elections, meaning that the candidate with the most votes takes the office. And that doesn't necessarily mean a majority. Quite often in our history across different elections at all levels, it's not 50% plus one that wins the seat. It's plurality.
Yeah.
Whoever gets the
Well,
most
and also, even when you're talking about a majority, we don't have a majority of people voting. So
yeah,
we don't have a
correct,
majority. We barely have a majority registered to vote,
correct,
and we barely
correct.
get a majority of those registered to vote to actually vote. So I think, Trump won the last one with what, about
Yeah,
24% of the voting age populace voting for
yeah,
him.
yeah.
Biden or Obama won with 23 or 24%.
Right. But we've accepted that as how we do things here in the United States. Other countries configure their elections so that a true majority of the voting population is required, and or at least of those who cast votes. Like I said, there's as many ways to configure elections as there are democracies. The core features of uh, American elections has been um, centered around the promise of the next round of elections.
Hmm.
Because we have a two-party system and we have divided government, we have separation of powers. The norm has been um, governing towards the center. So if you think of the population as a typical bell curve with two parties, one nominally on the left, the other nominally on the right, throughout this two-party history, the competition has been for the bulk of votes at the top of that bell curve.
Right.
And so, assuming your voters on the left and on the right are closer to you than anyone in the other party, the competition has been towards that center, and that has
And that's
led.
what we talk about when we say running toward the middle
Correct,
in elections. You'll hear that from newscasters a lot.
and that has produced very common impressions prior to, say, maybe the last decade, that all of the candidates are the same, both parties are the same, there's no real difference, and led to a lot of apathy in voting because they're all competing towards that centrist. And the Democratic Party under Clinton became corporatist and centrist. That we're quite familiar with all of that.
Nope.
The benefit of that is that in, well, really across society, but we can, for convenience, talk about Congress. That helped to produce pork barrel politics, which sounds like a negative. But I think in retrospect, the frustration now that the American people have with Congress is nobody's working with each other. And bipartisanship was always the norm. The losing party had the prospect of the future. And then their goal was to moderate the other party through bipartisan negotiation to get things done, with
Hmm.
the expectation that when they were in the majority, the same would have to happen. And
Yeah.
so
It's what
elections
we
were
call the loyal opposition. That there was the other
elections were
party was the loyal
competitive,
opposition.
right? But the outcome wasn't a disaster because you always had the prospect of the next round of elections. Uh, the Republicans destroyed that norm with Newt Gingrich's contract on America, um, and he changed the Republican Party's conception of the meaning of elections as all-out war, and that understanding permeated the entirety of the party through the Tea Party period, and then into particularly the second Obama administration, when then Senate Majority Leader McConnell, right after the election, issued a mandate saying that the Republican Party was flat out no, that they were not going to work on anything submitted by the Democratic administration. And they were going to wait till the next election,
Yeah.
basically, and just vote no on everything.
Yeah, and let me put this a slightly different way because I think it even starts before Gingrich. I see it as really starting with the Reagan administration,
Well, yeah.
which is a point in time that everything starts with the Reagan administration in
You don't
modern
get
times.
Gingrich without Reagan, right? But this
Exactly.
particular
But
norm came out.
Reagan took us into a team mentality.
Yeah.
And the political parties became teams, and it was a team sport. And in team sports, you win. You don't have a win-win; you have one winners.
Yeah.
Where beforehand, there was more of government working toward the center, where there was compromise. That was the beginning of compromise becoming a dirty word. And then
Yeah.
Gingrich really moved that in even more, and then McConnell moved it to the ultimate
And
extent.
wasn't it the same political, I can't remember his name now, who the same political consultant behind Reagan who then was behind Gingrich? Was it Ailes? Was that who it was?
May have been. Haley Barbour was really an up and comer
Barber,
under Reagan
yeah.
that led to a lot of the Gingrich stuff.
Yeah.
And he was chairman of the Republican Party
Right.
under Gingrich. I'm not sure which one it was you're thinking of. Yeah.
So what that strategy, and really it was more doctrinal on the part of the Republicans that
Ooh,
led
hang
them.
on. Doctrinal. I like that word. That's one of those big words. Good.
But in the end, what it did was it polarized Congress because people weren't working with each other anymore, which fueled, and this became iterative between both sides, fueled polarization among the populace, and we see it in the media, and that bell curve became a U.
Right.
And that makes bipartisanship harder because now everyone is seeing elections as disaster, because on the one side, for those who support liberal democracy, we are seeing that the last election, in fact, was a disaster. It's sort of realizing the pinnacle of this trend. And just yesterday, or was it today, Noam, the Secretary of Homeland Security, said that they are working to ensure that, quote, the right people, end quote, vote in the next election and win the next election.
Yep.
So only the right people, as defined by MAGA, will be able to vote or will be able to win.
Right.
Maybe you'll get to vote, but the outcome is predetermined. And
right.
Just that anyone holding a cabinet position can say that reflects the destruction of this norm. And she posted this on social media or said it in an interview. It was either yesterday or at the beginning of the day today. Right before we went on, I went and checked. Nothing in the media about it. We accept this as how half of our country, half of our elected politicians view the meaning of elections now.
Yeah. Well, and also, let's go back to just a week ago. Donald Trump literally said on Truth Social, we need to nationalize elections. The Constitution says the states run elections. We need to nationalize federal elections, and they must be run by the Republican Party.
But he's also said things are going so well, why do we even need elections?
Right. Yeah. Well, he pushed that before. He keeps pushing it to how they can do it. And we can look at a lot of the things out of Minneapolis. In Minneapolis, it wasn't Kristi Noem, it was Pam Bondi who talked about, well, we'll pull ICE out of Minneapolis just as soon as Minneapolis turns over all their election records to us. So the unsaid thing was we can go through the records and figure out how to best tilt the election.
But we can talk about this more globally, right? Like, it is not just Trump; it's the people around him. Trump is the mouthpiece, right?
Right.
But attacks on really every aspect of our electoral system: who gets to vote, how the votes are counted. Well, actually, I skipped a step. Who gets to vote, how they vote, and how the votes get counted.
Yep.
I think it's self-explanatory, the global attack on who gets to vote.
Right.
And we have seen in many states where state government, meaning the state election commission, is controlled by MAGA Republicans. They cleared the voter rolls, and you had to be informed about it to re-register to vote,
Right.
and it disenfranchised thousands upon thousands of registered voters, people who had voted for decades and decades.
And one great example here, I think we might have talked about this briefly in a previous show, Houston, Texas. And
Yeah.
this is something that just came up at the beginning of last year. The stats started to come out.
Mhm.
Texas, we see as a red state, and some people say it may go purple at some point in time. But there has been so much gerrymandering and
Yeah.
so much voter disenfranchisement
Yeah.
just in and around the city of Houston that
Right.
if none of that had happened, the estimates are Texas would actually be a blue state. If
Right.
everyone in
Yeah.
Houston who had been who the system had worked against them is now allowed to vote, that alone would shift Texas.
Right.
To also be fair, though, the Democrats have certainly done their fair of gerrymandering seats in
Yeah.
states, and now it's an
Yeah.
attack on both sides. I want to challenge one thing, and I don't think it's challenging your basic message, but you and I have a difference of perspective on that U shape of politics. So we agree that there's a U there, that we've got on the right
Mhm.
hand side, we've got the Republicans. On the left-hand side, we've got the Democrats,
I don't
and
think
they
we
don't
have any
meet.
Republicans, but go ahead.
Right, but the
MAGA.
left and the right, whatever they are, they don't meet at the top anymore. They
No.
valley out, and it's one or the other. My
Mhm.
difference is that I look at it typically more from a capitalist profit perspective,
Oh, yeah.
and I see that both top pieces for a long time have
Yeah.
been focused on the rich, wealthy, big
For
corporate
sure.
elites. But there are some differences between those in the left and right. Some of them play the middle. At the same time, though, it's still not the same. I believe it has led to fascism, and capitalism often leads to fascism. We can talk about that one too. But previous to this, it was always the case that what we had was those groups allowed elections. They just tried to run the elections through lobbying and through ads and other things and get people to vote in their favor. And that's
That's
as American as apple pie,
right.
almost, is what it
There,
comes down to.
nobody is saying that democracy is perfect, any
Yeah,
democracy. Nobody is saying that our democracy perfectly lived up to the values that it espoused. But having the values was important, having
right.
the commitment, and trying to get closer and closer over time to those. But I want to just quickly, also attacks on how we vote. You'll
Yep,
remember the attacks on the locked ballot boxes that were outside of polling places that people could turn in the ballots that they'd received at home. Right? Remember, you could go to your
yep,
polling base and drop the
absolutely.
ballot in. Attacks on the mail-in ballots,
Yep,
which continue to go on. Um, attacks on uh, the electronic voting machines,
yep. Early
and then
voting.
also attacks on the counting of
Yep,
those ballots. All of this, all of this attack, and all of it lies. Fascism is based on lies and undermine truth. The United States of America, for as long as we can go back, has had the most secure elections on the planet
yeah,
with the least amount of fraud on
right.
the planet. Say what you will about the rest of our democracy, the United States of America has always been the model for free, fair, and secure elections. Free, fair, not that everyone gets to vote, but those who do vote,
Right.
they can vote how they want. Their votes are counted accurately, and people not allowed to vote don't get to vote.
Right.
And
Immigration's
nowhere
a great
is,
example here. That the lie that it is immigrants who are doing this. This now has been perpetuated by Trump. It
yep.
comes out of Project 2025 as one of the
Mhm.
things that they wanted to hit upon. The great part about that is Project 2025 is funded by the Heritage Foundation, among others. The New York Times just reported yesterday on a Heritage Foundation internal report that found that over the past 25 years, 77, that's 77, less than 100, 77 immigrants who were not legally registered and allowed to vote voted in 25 years.
In the
That
entire
is
country.
in the entire country. Yeah, that's a non-existent number. And it's a
Right.
blatant lie
Yeah.
that immigrants are taking up our
Yeah.
voter rolls and getting in to vote and taking up our social programs and getting in to use those.
Yeah.
They're not. These are just lies that are used to perpetuate what the
Yeah.
what the side wants.
Well, we spend a lot of time here on elections, but of course, if you don't have elections, you don't have democracy.
Yeah,
You can have elections and not have democracy, but if you don't have elections, that's it. There's no
correct.
democracy in the modern world. So if you're
All right.
wondering
So
why we spend so much time in this one norm, obviously
yeah, the
that's it.
thing that I actually though consider more important than elections is freedom of speech. Because if you
There you
don't
go.
have freedom of speech, you don't have elections. You might as well not have anything. You can't challenge anything if you don't have freedom of speech. So what's happening on freedom of speech?
I can't say.
Ooh, oh.
because of the consequences if I do.
This is why Professor Ostrow regularly gets my professor ratings say he's very funny. It's the dry humor, but it's very funny.
It's very dry, sandy like desert. Um, what's happening to freedom of speech? This one I have disputes with our favorite radio host sometimes because she can still say what she wants to on WCPT. We can have this podcast, right? We
By the
can
way,
still
that's Joan Esposito on WCPT AM 820, live, local,
live,
and
local, and
progressive.
progressive. Yeah,
I'm working on my
live
radio voice.
the afternoon, Monday to Friday.
Yep. Go
Um,
ahead.
you know, so this one's a little harder to detect as a norm. What we see again, though, is an attitude that if you support the fascist regime, you can say whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't, nothing that you say is legitimate. Let me give an example. I don't think I gave this. Did I talk about this last week? The disturbing scene I saw in Oak Park. I think I did.
You did, yeah.
Two kids.
Real quick repeat on that, though.
Yeah. So I was walking past a park in downtown Oak Park where Brian and I both live, and there were two young children, preschool or very close to it age, and they were playing ice and victim. One of the boys was lying face down on the ground, and the other one had a stick and was hitting him over the back with a stick. And they were playing ice agent and victim. And I was disturbed about this, and I posted on it in social media. And a MAGA supporter who was also a cop commented saying, another lie, another thing that never happened. And the comment was not in the long run about the action that I observed.
Mm-hmm.
The comment was really about his outrage that I spoke out about it.
Right.
And what he was saying was, if you speak out about against the things that this regime is doing, you are no longer legitimate.
Absolutely. We see this in so many forms. Protests is the easy one. The way that the regime is attempting to go after protesters.
And that's really important. Can I interrupt? It's the
Please.
way they are doing it. Keep going.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because regimes have always, every government doesn't like protesters against the government.
Nor do faculty. Nobody likes to be protested against. Hello.
Exactly. But what you do is
supported.
important. So we've seen a lot of this in the news. We've seen the violence building up. We've seen the illegal arrests, extrajudicial arrests. We've seen no extrajudicial killings. We've seen threats. At the same time, though, now, and this was just announced this morning,
Yep.
we find out that the Justice Department has asked big social media companies to send them all the records of everyone who is saying anything negative about ICE policy.
Oh, but more than ICE policy, about the administration.
Yep.
And that has already been implemented at the border from tourists from other countries who come here who've had to show their social media and been turned away at the border.
Oh, not just tourists. I have multiple friends in a variety of vulnerable groups. I have friends who are racially vulnerable groups, friends who are LGBTQ groups, and they literally talk among themselves. And I've heard a number of these conversations first and second hand. What do you have to do when you're traveling abroad? Well, I get a burner phone or I keep my burner phone on me and keep my other phone turned off in my luggage. And we're talking about the idea that you want to turn off your Face ID on your phone if you go to a protest, because otherwise the police aren't allowed to ask for your passcode, but they can put it up to your face and open your phone and look at
Yeah.
everything in your phone to blame you for something you said.
And let me tell you, as one who wrote about, like, my master's thesis was about the erosion of censorship in Gorbachev's late Soviet Union and the beginnings of free speech. I was focusing on press freedom, but they do intersect, obviously. Censorship is bad, right?
Mhm.
Government censorship is bad. It is crushing, but it is nothing like self-censorship, which is
Right,
much more insidious. Is That's where the freedom of speech part comes in. When you start when you even have to think about, is it okay if I film this? Is it okay if I even carry my phone in anything other than airplane mode or off,
right,
or not carry it at all? Is it okay if I carry this sign? What will happen to me if I say this?
right.
That that is what this regime wants. They want us to be in fear of the things that we may say so that we don't say them.
And every discussion we've had about fascism, fourth week that we're doing it, revolves around the us and them,
Yep.
revolves around the who is us and who is them.
Yep.
And we, if we are they, if the fascist regime is us and we are the they group has a fear of speaking in certain ways, has a fear of going out in public and saying certain things. And that's vulnerable people in that group have a extreme and even much more well-founded fear because they're more likely to be persecuted. But then you just get, people in the group who wouldn't normally be persecuted who wonder, is this something I even want to do? Because they're going to get involved in our lives. So you and I may be talking about people who protest and people who bring this stuff up on social media. What about the people in this country who don't speak because they are completely shut up and because they don't want to put themselves out there at all for fear of what might happen?
Correct. And since they go hand in hand, um, and this would also go back to our favorite interviewer's comments, we still have media that are critical of the regime,
Mm-hmm.
without a doubt. We have media that are trying to report on things that would be harmful to MAGA officials. Again, not just the mouthpiece, but up and down. But freedom of the press is very much under attack in this country. Um, and the arrests of Don Lemon and the other journalist at that one church where they were there to cover a protest against a pastor, I believe it was, who I think was an ICE agent or had been an official in ICE. Arresting them for covering that was this regime's trial balloon against taking attacks on media institutions, fueling the purchases of the major publishers and media owners by MAGA billionaires, whether Bezos or Ellison or others, and going after individual journalists. And this is not the first set of MAGA attacks against journalists. There was the mass shooting in the first
Right.
Trump regime at the newspaper, I believe it was in Virginia. I can't remember what the town was. There have been other arrests and attacks at the ICE protest, journalists, of course, being gassed and beaten. But this was a brazen arrest and charges against journalists who really obviously were only doing their job.
Yeah.
Of
Well,
standing
it's also direct call outs.
up.
Even before the arrest, this started building
Oh, yeah.
with this is a regime that has been calling out journalists by name.
Yes.
And when
And
the
attacking
dear
them
leader
personally.
doesn't like what a specific journalist does, that person gets called out by name with the intent of
Fake.
making their
Yeah.
lives difficult and trying to silence them.
Yeah. And with those attacks, um, by calling them horrible people, by calling them enemies of the state. MAGA has described opposition media as enemies of the state.
Yes.
That's a
Them.
direct
Yeah.
translation of a core Stalinist phrase and Hitler's phrase.
Right.
So specifically about journalists and media. And using those terms is a typical mode for fascist leaders to activate violence among their supporters against those quote unquote enemies, meaning those who
Absolutely.
would
I,
dare
we're
to report on.
we're dancing around two things here. I want to go to them one at a time. The
Yep.
first is universities and then corporations, because the freedom of speech certainly applies to universities too. Why don't you throw out a few of the things happening there, and we can talk about that a little bit, and then go to the corporate side.
I thought you were going to ask me to throw out the universities. So
Which universities do you believe shouldn't be allowed to speak because they
oil.
speak out? Exactly.
Let's start with that. Yeah, so early on after taking office in January 2025, Trump sent his was it the Justice Department and the Education Department
Yeah.
against basically sued most of the largest, most prestigious universities from Harvard on down. Why did they go after those? Because those are the ones that receive the most grant money to conduct research, scientific research, independent research. That research seeks to reveal the truth, which is the main purpose of the university. The word university derives from I don't remember exactly what
One of
it
those
is.
Greek things that means truth.
Pursuit of knowledge, pursuit of
Yes.
truth.
Yeah.
And so if you step back and think of why would the fascist regime go after universities, it's because universities seek accurate information, whether it is in the realm of science or society or justice. Attacking that enables the regime to control messaging at
Yeah,
all
and they're
levels
also not just seeking information. Universities
and
tend to
creating
be
fear.
influencers. University academics become public academics. They speak to the public on the news broadcast. They speak to the public in publications that go to everyone, as opposed to just peer-reviewed journals. They speak to people in the administration, to professionals. So
Correct.
universities are the places where we get the information about the environment, and information about foreign policy, and information about defense policy, and many, many other things. In this particular attack too, and again, this is pre-planned. This is directly
Oh
out of the
yeah,
Project 2025 playbook. This particular attack, as you mentioned, starts with Harvard, starts with Yale, starts with Columbia, Northwestern, Georgetown. What they were trying to do, and what they were successful at in several cases, was getting these universities to self-censor. They don't
correct.
want to have to censor
Put
them.
them in fear. Yeah.
Exactly. And Columbia and Northwestern did it. They are self-censoring. At least
And
Harvard is sitting
Brown
back
and
and fighting it.
Columbia and Harvard. I mean, Harvard has largely caved. There is that suit that they have out there.
Yeah.
What is even more troubling than all that, Brian, is the silence of the faculty at those places. I say silence because whatever the faculty at those places have said is nowhere near loud enough.
Right.
Like they should cancel all the classes and protest with the students.
Yeah.
Like so that gets back to the self-censorship and the fear.
Right. And this is one of those things, we don't have an American tradition of that kind of censoring, of that kind of protest, but everybody else in the world would be doing that. And one of the things that's being taken advantage of here is the fact that we don't have that kind of environment of protest. And it's making it easier in some ways for the regime to take these actions.
And do you know why we don't have that history? Because these norms that MAGA is trashing were so deeply entrenched and we so deeply assume that they could never go away that paradoxically it makes it easier for the regime to shred them,
Yeah,
because it is inconceivable to the American mind that these norms don't exist.
right.
Even on the MAGA side, they can shred them and still say, oh, yeah, there's still freedom of speech.
Yeah. Although I will say there have been attacks on intellectualism, largely by the right in this country forever, but especially since the 40s and 50s. We've talked about those picking up before. This is
Yeah.
different than
This is
attacks
the
on
system
intellectualism.
itself going after the
Yeah,
norms, or the
this is
regime itself,
directly.
government.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, and that's a very different thing than
Yeah.
talking about these liberal these
Mhm.
liberal elite schools. That's a political statement. Going after the liberal elite schools, quote unquote, is very much a fascist action. For
It's the
time
same
purposes,
process on the corporate side, really. I really
absolutely.
don't
Let's
see any
let's
difference.
let's switch to that. Let's go to that a little bit.
You
One
might
of the
actually know more
things,
about this than I do, because you study this, the
yeah.
corporate side of things, more than I do, being an anti-capitalist and basically a Stalinist communist yourself. So
Well, yeah. Thank you very much. I'm usually
you're
called a
welcome. Yeah.
Trotskyist as opposed to a Stalinist communist, but however you want to label me and negate me, I'm just
Well,
fine with
I
that.
was being nice because Trotsky took an ice pick to the head at a relatively young
Exactly.
age.
Well,
Stalin lived to his natural death, so I was
why do
trying to
you
give him
think
a
I
little
have?
here.
Why do you think I have certain weapons on my wall to defend myself? That this is a very important thing. Trotsky didn't understand that part. Anyway, what
Yeah.
I am is a person who is highly critical of our capitalist economy as it has evolved and as it has taken over our politics.
And on this
But
we
I've
have no disagreement.
Right. But I've also studied how capitalism can be a part of fascism. I
Yep.
don't think it is inevitably there, but the direction we've been going, there are many people that have suggested it is a stepping stone
Yep.
process. We saw this starting with the original modern fascist regime in Mussolini's Italy. Mussolini described his regime as corporate statism, where the corporations and the state work together. And as opposed to
Mhm.
corporatism where the corporations dominate the state, which is arguably what we had from the 1980s to present, and maybe well before that, or 1980s until the last 4 years, the last couple of
But they
years.
were still independent
They were
too.
independent, exactly. And that was the corporations driving. The
Yeah.
difference in fascism is that the state subsumes the corporations.
Yep.
And that's really what we've seen in the past year, not background, but very active, is Donald Trump and the administration coming out and saying, you will work for us. If you want this, you
Yes.
will pay money. If you
And
want
what?
this, you
Yeah.
will, in fact, do what the government tells you to do. Examples of the lawsuits that have been settled. I'm not
Yep.
remembering any of the companies who had the big lawsuit, first big lawsuit that was settled. There have been three or
Mhm.
four of them that were out there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there
Don't
was an early lawsuit
Yeah, you're right.
where Donald Trump personally had been suing a corporation for slander for speaking against him
Yep.
for $40 million,
Yep.
and he gets into office, and all of a sudden that lawsuit settles. And
Mhm.
Donald Trump becomes $40 million richer because he threatens the corporation as president. This was
But I think
happening
it's
with
worse than what you're describing, because what we see, it's not acquiescence. There is a zeal, a jubilant uh,
absolutely.
desire to flock to this fascist regime, whether it was Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Disney or Paramount or one after the other. They have
Particularly all the news organizations owned by
Goldman
billionaires.
and Chase and Bank of America, all of them. I really can't think of a major corporation in this country that has not sprinted to embrace this fascist regime and this corporate.
Absolutely. And I want to be clear, though. Yes, that's absolutely happening, and the corporations are doing it. But I think the big piece of it is the corporations are seeing that the government has set things up such that you are with the government or against the government.
Correct.
And corporations have made the profit-driven decision, as they always do, to be with the government. But that took several months in the first year of work to
Yeah.
get us to that point where it became clear if you do the government's bidding, you will be in on the good side. More
Yeah.
importantly, though, if you don't do the government's bidding, you will be punished. Tariffs will be directed at you. Government business will be taken away from you. Contracts for
Yeah.
you will be canceled or will not be granted when they were in range. So you have to do the government's bidding if you want to stay in business. Plus, it's profitable for you. So the corporations tend to run to it too.
Can I bring this around to the norms of American democracy?
Yes, please.
The reason we have a capitalist economy is in the philosophy and theory. Capitalism is an economic system that's based on freedom. You are free to pursue the job you want. You are free to open the business you want. It's competition produces the best outcomes. Friendly and peaceful competition. There will be winners or losers, but then you can win again. That was the idea of the American dream. You come here and you can make of yourself what you want in a free and liberal society. And that is still a norm that we can't imagine could ever disappear here, but it is very much under attack, starting with the extreme right-wing move to install judges and justices, which resulted in Citizens United, corporations being people, the fusion of corporations with government that eliminated regulation, that eliminated antitrust, that allowed for the monopolization across all of the industries, eroded competition. So then the barriers to entry, it doesn't matter what sector of the economy it is, become so high that the prospects of entering disappear and the American dream goes away. We hear all the time now people graduating from college lack the prospects of home ownership in the future, right? That
Absolutely.
is
Now you're
the
giving my
end
speech.
of the American dream. It's all connected that way. And
Uh,
that's right, that freedom in the economic marketplace has been destroyed because of deregulation and the erosion of competition.
I do want to be clear, though. Once again, you're describing the corporatism and plutocracy that we've been seeing build up since the 1980s. What makes it fascism now
Right.
is the government being more
Hmm.
directly involved. Up
Right.
to this point, up until the last year, yes, this was something where our corporatist, plutocratic, oligarchy, whatever you want to call it, culture had made gigantic multi-billionaire, possibly the first trillionaire soon winners, and middle class that's disappearing or that has completely disappeared.
Right.
Made a generation, now multiple generations of kids who are not going to surpass their parents, who are not going to achieve the American dream. That's been building, but now what's ending up happening is fascism is utilizing that. The
Yeah.
populism that Trump has taken up is utilizing that, but instead of that populism bringing things more back to the people, that populism is saying, oh, look, we can solve this by making everything more government centric. And this is the
Right.
opposite of the old Republican Party that said government is bad and we need to get everything away from government.
It's the opposite of the core element, the number one norm of American democracy, American political culture, which is skepticism of government, the understanding that government is to be limited by separation of powers and checks and balances on those powers, and above all, on limiting executive authority. We want small government that is not able to do big things. And that is the people who wanted government to not be able to do big things. Even when we wanted government to do big things, like maybe universal health care, we still didn't really trust government to do that. And that's why we never got it. Because as a society, as a political culture, our democracy was, yeah, it might be better, but I don't want the government doing it because I don't trust those bastards.
I,
And
I'm, I'm,
that
I'm,
is being shredded.
I'm smiling here because we disagree on the basis of this, but we don't disagree on the final message. So my disagreement on the basis is I think since the beginning of this country, our question of limited government has been driven by elites. It was
By
driven
what?
by elites. It was driven by the big landowners among big white male landowners among the founding fathers, and it's been driven since then. We can have a whole nother series of shows on
Yeah,
this one. But hang on,
Americans do not trust authority. I mean, that was not
Americans don't
the elites.
Americans have been taught not to trust authority. It isn't
Oh,
just a natural thing. It's something that we have been taught to do.
well, we're taught everything, Brian. We're born
That is
crying,
true.
defenseless, peeing, pooping,
Yeah. But
helpless.
let's move back to fascism for a minute, because fascism becomes much more important here, and it
Yes.
twists it. Whether or not you
Mhm.
think this is a natural American thing, or whether
It
or not
takes
you think
over
this
and
is
destroys
ritually
that.
selling us in order to get them more
Correct.
profits. Once we hit last year, what we're seeing is, and you use the words that are the core American, another core American institution, the complete and utter deterioration of checks and balances. We
Destruction
have
of
been
it, right?
seeing increases in executive power since the
Correct.
70s and Nixon, but
Correct.
now they've just totally gone away. Let's talk
They've
about that one.
eliminated, right? Eliminating inspectors general in every agency of government. What are those inspectors general supposed to do? To uncover and punish illegal activity within that agency. Across the agency, the inspectors general have been eliminated. Why? Because fascists don't like transparency, and fascists fight actively against accountability.
Right.
So
And
that is talking about an all-powerful unitary executive without any checks and balances.
and
There is
that's it.
no fascism without that.
That's inside the executive. One of the biggest ones is Congress has completely and utterly abdicated any idea of being an organization that will check the executive. They are just this rubber stamping. They're not even rubber stamping everything. They are ignoring everything that the executive is doing and letting them do whatever they want to. So
The
even on
MAGA side of
tariffs,
Congress.
Congress should be taking back the power of tariffs. The president shouldn't be able to put tariffs on. That's a job of Congress, and the leaders of Congress just aren't talking about it. They're just letting it happen.
I, I would disagree in part on that. It is
Okay.
one party, the
Yes.
ruling party, the MAGA
Yes.
party. The Democratic Party, even when they held a majority uh, in Congress with a Democratic president, never abdicated oversight, never abdicated accountability for the different branches of government.
I agree.
Uh,
But I'll also
you
say
might not like, and I might not like that they didn't go far enough, but they would hold hearings, and the Democrats would grill the Democratic cabinet
yes.
members if there was something controversial, or if they felt that the money that they'd appropriated was not being spent the way they wanted,
Uh,
or if they felt there was illegal activity, whether it was drone bombings or anything
right.
else, or arming Israel for the perpetration of genocide against Gaza. You might not. They continued to do it, but there was open and hard questioning of Democratic officials by Democrats in Congress.
I personally wouldn't say there was as much as there should be, but that's a matter of degree.
Of course
But
not.
also, to be fair, even under George W. Bush, where it was eroding heavily, the Republican Party was better than it is right now.
Oh
We're
yeah, there is
looking
no Republican Party.
right. Well, it is Mike Johnson in charge of everything
That's
in
MAGA.
the House and just stopping anything from happening at all. And
Yeah,
it's not even that he's a toady. He is complicit. He is openly working with the president on it.
he's more than complicit. He's an engine of this
Yeah.
process. The Republican Party was a conservative party. The Democratic Party was the progressive party. Both worked to strengthen and adhere to those norms. I say there's no Republican Party anymore. It's MAGA because they reject the norms. They're undermining the system that the
Yeah,
Republican Party, the conservative party, was the one that most zealously supported those norms. The Democratic Party
absolutely.
today is the conservative party.
I was just saying,
Fascist on values, conservative on wanting to go back to the truths we're supposed to hold to be
Right.
self-evident. The
I was just saying
Republicans
in
want
class
to continue.
earlier this week that when you look at what is happening here, oh my
Yeah.
God, I completely lost my idea. It'll come back in a minute. That happens sometimes.
Well,
Let's go to court. Let's go to the courts though, and I'll
no,
come back to the
I'm
idea that
actually
I
thinking
just
if
had.
50 minutes, like maybe we could say the same things. The story is the same for all of the other norms and institutions that I wrote down on my list, whether you're talking about due process and civil rights, whether you're talking about judicial independence, which we talked about when we talked about what was going on in Minnesota. We already sort of talked about
Oh yeah,
the erosion of
but
civil rights.
judicial independence, we're seeing it better at the lower levels. We're seeing some reversals, even from some Republican appointed judges. But then you get to the Supreme Court, and
Yeah,
once again, the Supreme Court has been running toward the
correct,
5 judges on the right, 6 judges on the right for a while.
correct.
They are just making what would have been
Whatever.
insane decisions,
Yeah,
and that are just absolutely blatantly, no questions
yeah,
asked, political, that are coming out. Once
right.
or twice we've seen some things that might not fit under that, but the amount of blatant political decisions, and even the expectation now, when we now know as a culture, when things get to the Supreme Court, they're just automatically going to cut one way, and it's going to be the MAGA way.
Yeah. Um, I would note under the judiciary and the attacks on an independent judiciary, the FBI was the investigative unit of the judiciary, supposed to be independent. The FBI had an office for counterterrorism, and there were regional offices for counterterrorism around the country that really got beefed up after 9/11, and that has all been decimated. It's
Oh
all
yeah.
gone.
Well,
Um,
you look
and
at any independence in the FBI and the Justice Department is
yeah, all
completely
gone.
gone. The FBI and the Justice Department now are investigating the enemies of the president, because the
Right,
president gets on Truth Social
correct.
in public and says, "This is my enemy. They
Right.
must be investigated." There's
And
nothing.
that's
There's
the
no
end of due
hiding it in
process
any
and
way,
civil
shape, or form.
rights, the end of due process and criminal rights, erosion of civil rights. Um, if you take all of the things, many of the things we talked about together, it's a tax on the norm of privacy in a
Yeah.
democratic society, that we have a private and we have a public. Fascism eliminates the private, where everything becomes political, which means everything becomes dangerous. And the regime can decide arbitrarily, you're wearing a black sweater.
Yep.
What is,
Nope.
yep, off with your head.
Yep.
And um, we can talk about Americans have long understood that anywhere in the country gets hit with a disaster, they get help.
Right.
That's gone. North
No.
Carolina is
Absolutely.
not getting any assistance
No.
for the damages from the hurricane. FEMA's
The,
gone.
the, the question is, do you have a Republican or a Democratic governor? Did you vote the right way? Are you sufficiently MAGA in the things that you say? If your state wants help, you need that.
That there are entities of government, however flawed, that their work is to try to improve education, that their
Mhm.
work is to try to improve, enhance, and protect the health of the population.
Mhm.
All that's being obliterated.
Yeah. Oh, and not only that, but what most people don't see, health is a great example of this. So let's take all of the different health agencies
Yeah.
and look at Kennedy as the ultimate example of this. So you might say that Robert F. Kennedy is crazy because of the
Robert F.
vaccine
Kennedy Jr.
question.
Please put the
Junior,
junior in.
thank you very much. Robert F. Kennedy, thank you. I don't want to go too far back. RFK
No.
Jr., you might say he's crazy. You might say he had a brain worm. He did. Everybody knows about that one. But this is crazy with purpose. He actually, I'm not
Mhm.
positive if he has purpose or if he's just being taken advantage of because he's crazy. When we talk about limiting vaccines, that is a direct attack on Black and brown Americans who are more likely to vote against MAGA. That is an election challenge, and people don't look at it that way,
Mhm.
because those are the people who are going to suffer the most. When we talk about big beautiful bill and getting rid of Medicaid. That is an attack on the people who are most likely to vote against MAGA. Now, it's going to get some people who are likely to vote for MAGA in rural states too at the same time. But many of these healthcare things are attacking the most vulnerable people who need the help the most and who are most likely to turn on or vote against the MAGA party.
I disagree.
Okay.
I,
How?
I think it's an attack on all of us, whether education or health, uh, because chaos and death fuel fascist
Yes,
consolidation of power.
that's correct.
Ignorance, questioning information, like eliminating fact, and that vaccines protect our health is a fact.
Right,
That, because it was such a universally accepted fact, has to be attacked because fascism is a global attack on truth and on facts. And so, health, particularly in the wake of the pandemic, and even at the beginning of the pandemic, right? Part of the messaging that Trump and MAGA espoused, whether it was on what was it called, ivermectin or bleach,
right,
or injecting bleach up your asshole, or all the other things that came out of their mouths. The masks don't help to keep you
right.
safe.
No, absolutely.
All of those attacks meant to undermine information, to undermine truth and facts, to create chaos, fuels the consolidation of fascist power, and ultimately also enables the clan that seizes power to profit. And RFK Jr. is directly profiting off of
Yeah,
the bullshit supplements, the health coaches. That whole
right.
industry is worth billions and billions of dollars. By the way, my
Yeah.
health, you know what he's named? My health coach is Dr. Boblik. My primary care physician, that's my health coach. Thank you very
Excellent.
much. Yeah.
No, and this is really the final most important command is don't believe the evidence of your
Don't
eyes. And
believe
that's
the
what's happening. We talked about this a little bit last time, but
yeah.
it bears repeating. This is not a case of trying to get people to believe alternative facts. This is a case of trying to make facts go away and make us
Distrust what you
unable
see in that video.
to
Mhm.
see between facts and non-facts and
Correct.
unable to distinguish and questioning everything. We shouldn't be questioning things that are factual. We shouldn't be questioning that polio causes paralysis and polio vaccines stopped kids from getting paralyzed. That's just factual.
Right.
That's just there.
Right. Yep. Well, that's a
All right,
fact.
let's wrap this up. Do you have things that we haven't talked about that we absolutely must get in on American institutions?
On American institutions, if anything we've left out, I think whoever views this episode will understand it's the same process.
Yeah,
It's the same process for the same reason on all of these. Um, and what perhaps is scariest is how far this regime has succeeded in eroding all of these
yeah,
norms. And they are very, very difficult, if not impossible, to put back together, or are impossible to put back together the way they were before. Like,
right.
on the other side of this has to be something new, really, in all of these things, because they've all failed in
Yeah,
the end. Even the ones that were successful for a long time, by virtue of being destroyed or shredded, something new has to come out so that it doesn't happen again.
yeah. I do want to take us back to the beginning to finish here, though, because I think it's
Sure.
incredibly important to keep your eyes on the prize. The prize is getting rid of free, fair, honest elections and moving
Yep.
us to a system where the regime knows the results of the elections in advance. They have set everything up such that it's a foregone conclusion that they win, and that we move into a system where the fascist regime is in charge and competitors are incapable of getting any serious amounts of power, at least starting at the federal level. All of this goes to that. When we put everything together, that is the thing that is really on the line. Plus, a lot of people making a lot of money along the way while it's happening. But the basis of the fascist side of it is long term control for us, whoever the us is on the fascist side, and can they establish it? And that's why 2026 and 2028 are going to be such important telling points. One of the bottom line things we didn't mention that we talk about with democracies around the world, the bottom line, if to say that you are democracy, is you have to have competitive elections where the parties change. And America has always had that. And the attempt here is to move us to elections that are not competitive, where the parties do not change. And if we move to that, we have moved into full-blown fascism. We're on the road now. That's going to be the determinant in these next two federal elections that I think is really there.
Next two. I put the odds at 2080 that we will have real elections in the fall. I think it's too late.
This is why we call Joel.
No, because of the continuing mass recruiting of armed thugs in numbers sufficient to have 4 or 5 of those guys at every single polling place in the country, and eliminating or attacking mail-in voting. Those things together end free elections in this country.
Here's the good news. The good news is, as our friend Joan Esposito regularly says, Dr. Joel Ostrow is one of the most cynical people in the city of Chicago and its greater metropolitan area. And I think that's true. The bad news is I'm
often right.
Yep. I only disagree with Joel a little bit here. He says 2080. I think it's probably 50-50. And that's an extremely cynical viewpoint, because we're talking about American democracy and the ability to change parties. Even if you don't like the two-party system, even if you don't think that the parties have that much difference, this is parties versus fascism. This is moving us in such a horrible direction. And I do think that not quite as much as Joel. I think there's a little more hope, but I think we're heavily along that path.
I think a part of the problem, part of the reason you see it as 50-50, which is probably a lot lower than most people in states that are largely progressive.
Right.
If you had regular connections, say, with people in Tennessee, you would be more on the 2080 side. And there are a lot of states like that. And I think a lot, you don't have to be a person of color to be scared to walk past ICE agents into a polling place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially if they can demand to see your phone and social media and what you've said about ICE. So all of that together is really scary.
And they can watch your podcasts, of course. That's another factor that's out there.
And please do watch the podcast.
Exactly. Not just the World Discord podcast, but all the other podcasts trying to provide actual news and actual truth about what's going on out there.
Watch this podcast while you can still access it.
That's true. We might have to go to Canada.
Right.
Can we broadcast?
Ryan, will I see you next time?
You will see me next time, assuming that your worst predictions aren't true and they don't come true sooner than next week.
I think we're good for another week.
Okay,
Thanks for producing this, David.
It's like 30-70 that we'll still be here next week, is what you're saying.
Pretty much.
Okay, excellent. Yes, thank you, David, for producing, and thank you all very much for listening. We're doing fascism for at least a couple more weeks because there's so much stuff to talk about. And please tell all your friends about the World Discord podcast, and we hope to see you again soon.
See you soon. Bye.
Bye.